Well, Los Angeles Angels superstar Mike Trout is having surgery to repair a torn meniscus in his knee. The team says there's no timetable for his return, but it's not expected to be a season-ending injury. The three-time MVP was off to a torrid start with his 10 home runs leading all of baseball. It's just the latest setback for the future Hall of Famer. He missed half of the 2023 season with a broken bone in his wrist. Trout spoke about his latest injury.
One of them things, like my body was like, I wasn't feeling it hitting, I wasn't feeling it running. It was just sore, just kind of like I was kind of telling myself like maybe I just banged it on something, and I didn't realize it. And then after the game, getting treatment, it was really sore. The plan was just to see how I felt in the morning. If you woke up and it was sore, just get it looked at. That was the plan. Last night was tough for me to sleep. It was just aching all night. Woke up, I texted Frosty first thing and just said, yeah, I think I need to just get this looked at. Just trying to clear my mind a little bit. Results came back just meniscus. So it's just frustrating. We've been through it.
Well, the big fish in Anaheim was starting to look like his old self, especially across the first 18 games of the season, batting .282 with 8 homers and 11 RBI and slugging .690, but a bit of a regression as of late, but still worth noting. His 10 home runs were leading the majors, putting him on pace to surpass 400 career homers, and his 6 stolen bases equaled his totals from the last 4 seasons combined. We are now joined by CBS Sports MLB insider Matt Snyder. And Matt, it's extremely tough news for Trout, who was on his way to maybe having an MVP caliber start to the season. But what more can you tell us about his injury?
Well, we know that a torn meniscus is not nearly as serious as something, for example, like an ACL. I can tell you as a 45-year-old who's not an athlete anymore, I just had torn meniscus surgery the December before last, December 2022, and I felt like in 2 months or so I was getting close to being back, and I'm obviously not even close to the physical specimen that Mike Trout is. So I actually think that this might not be that long, maybe 2 months or so. My hunch is in 6 weeks or so he could start ramping up some baseball activities, maybe go on a rehab assignment. But I'm going to try to be optimistic and say that he's not going to miss a huge portion of the season, maybe a third or so. And hey, we'll take all we can get from Mike Trout at this point, because he's been devastated by injuries the last several years. He hasn't played over 150 games since 2016. He had 140 in 2018, 134 in 2019, 53 in 2020 out of 60 total. But ever since COVID year, he's been hurt every single year. So hopefully he comes back relatively soon, like in 2 months or so, and can resume hitting a lot of home runs, because he's 22 away from 400, as you alluded to.
Absolutely. And Matt, don't sell yourself short, okay? I'm sure you are quite the specimen, kind of like Mike Trout. But no, certainly that's encouraging news, considering you having this injury and seeing that process. And maybe for Angels fans who I'm sure feel a little deflated after hearing that news, but just considering how brutal this news is for Trout, who has, as you mentioned, been hindered by injuries as of late. He played in just 36 games in 2021, 119 in 2022, and only 82 last season. Now, at 32 years old, what do you think this injury means for his future, if anything?
Well, yeah, it's a snowball effect, right? Because of how many injuries we've seen the last few years, it gets into his ability to rack up the kind of counting stats that you would expect from an all-time great. So if we're talking about an all-time great power hitter, you can go past even 500 home runs, and you can look at 600 home runs. It's funny, he has that commercial with Ken Griffey Jr. right now where Griffey says something about, yeah, try to get to 630. With all these injuries, he can't. He's just not going to have enough time left. I still think he gets to 500 home runs. But these injuries mean he's not going to do things like approach 600 or maybe 650 or even 700 home runs, because he just hasn't been on the field enough to continue racking up the kind of counting stats that we would expect from an all-time great. Rate stats, he's still all there. I mean, the average on base, slugging, WAR, all that stuff's amazing on Trout. It's just, with all these injuries, he's not getting into those stratospheres of the really high totals, so hits, for example. He has 1,648. Can he get to 3,000? I don't know about that. I don't know if he has that much time left in the majors, especially with all these injuries. And if he hadn't been injured all these times, he'd probably be closing in on 2,000, in which case we would say, hey, yeah, he's probably going to get to 3,000. But now I don't know.
You talk about time left in the majors. He signed that 12-year, $426.5 million contract. That was back in 2019, earning just under $35.5 million each year through 2023. We talk about this being year 14 for Mike Trout, and you're saying you don't know if he'll be able to reach some of those accolades. How long do you kind of see him potentially playing?
Well, I still think whenever he's good to go, whenever he's healthy enough to play, he's still amazing. As we've seen this year, he's leading the majors with 10 home runs. His average is a little low, but I think that it was going to come back up pretty quickly anyway, and it probably will once he returns. But it's just a matter of how many games is he going to be able to stay on the field, and then are all these injuries going to take a toll on him once he gets up into his mid-30s or late 30s? So it's really tough to tell. I mean, we have cases where guys ended up having a renaissance in their late 30s. And if we're looking at the home run leaderboards, there's Barry Bonds and Hank Aaron, who both hit a million home runs, it seemed like, after they turned 35. Obviously, people will want to throw an asterisk next to Bonds on there, but still we could look at Hank Aaron. But again, you just don't know what kind of a physical toll is being taken on Trout's body, so that when he is 38, 39, how good is he still going to be? Look at Miguel Cabrera. His last few years, he was not near the power hitter that we'd seen. He just his body didn't provide him with any power anymore. So I didn't know that I was going to head down that road to Cabrera, but it is funny that Trout and Cabrera remain connected there. He was fresh in my mind. It's frustrating. It's mildly depressing, but yeah, it does seem like we're seeing an all-time great get kind of totally cut down from injuries, and it's preventing him from just seeing how far he could have gotten on some of those stats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think frustrating is a perfect way to put it, not just for Angels fans, but also Mike Trout. You mentioned some of these milestones that we might not be able to see him make, one of the all-time greats, one of the best players in the majors, just because injuries hampering his career. But nonetheless, encouraging news, at least from you, Matt, that maybe it won't be too long that we'll be without the big Trout. Appreciate the insight. Thank you so much. And Trout's last 3 seasons hindered by injuries. He spent more time off the field than on, appearing in just 237 games out of 486. That's a tough blow for Trout, who was off to a nice year 14 in the majors.